Awesome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to AI, a primer for leaders in corporate finance. We're going to allow just a few more minutes to allow some more people to log in. And while we do that, I'm going to run a short video, a minute and a half. So we're going to just let that roll, and then we'll be right back in less than 2 minutes. Brian?
It's no secret, the pace of business is accelerating. Competition is springing up from unexpected directions. The winners will be those who invest capital the most effectively, year in and year out. But keeping track of and evaluating consistently all of the possible investment ideas across your enterprise is challenging. Establishing an accurate picture of your actual capital spend to date and updating your forecast project by project can be backbreaking. The tragic reality for many companies is that managing capital has become all about reporting and reconciliation, leaving very little time for real planning or analysis. What's needed is a system for CapEx that can increase productivity, one that can deliver reliable capital investment data and ensure reporting accuracy. With the ability to generate valuable capital project and portfolio insights, your business will be able to make faster, more informed CapEx decisions and drive long-term growth and success for your organization. Finario is the first financial planning system purpose-built for CapEx. Finally, a single source of truth for capital investment. A cloud solution that's easy to use and deploy, delivering rapid time to value. Finario, the solution for CapEx. Invest to win.
All righty. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. We really appreciate that you've taken some time from your day to join us today, and I can promise you that it will be time well spent. And why can I say that? Well, because we are super excited and privileged to have joining with us today Dr. Seth Dobrin, who is a global AI expert. Until very recently, the global chief AI officer at IBM, the very first such chief AI officer. He is a Qantm Top 100 Leaders in Data and Analytics 2022. He was the AI Innovator of the Year in 2021 at the AI Summit, a member of Calix Scientific Advisory Board. I hope I said that right. Board advisor of the Women Leaders in Data and AI, a board member of the Responsible AI Institute. He has a doctorate in molecular and cellular biology. I, in fact, can go on and on. His resume would take 5 slides to complete. Safe to say that we have with us someone who can really shed light on this emerging, important, and interesting topic, AI and machine learning. And I think you'll get a lot out of this. So thank you again for joining us. After my conversation with Seth, I'm going to do a quick review of the literature and research on the adoption of AI and machine learning in corporate finance. Um, I think you'll find some interesting data points there. And then lastly, to put a cherry on top of this whole discussion, I'm going to bring my esteemed colleague, Bill Mayo, to show you a quick 5-6 minute demo of one of Finario's newest features called Finario Predict, which uses the data within your organization, within your capital expenditure, capital allocation, budget, and historical projects to do what's called reference class forecasting. which can have a profound impact on your forecast accuracy. So it brings a lot of what we're about to talk about today into perspective. A few housekeeping notes. You will find to the right of your screen there's a question panel. If you'd like to ask a question to either Seth or Bill, please put it in that panel. We'll do our best to get to some of your questions. We have a lot to cover, so if we don't get to your questions, we'll be sure to follow up with you individually. Lastly, there's arrows in the corner of your event screen, which you can use to toggle to full screen, which I think you may find more practical for your viewing pleasure, and particularly when we get to the demo section of our presentation. So before we kick off with Seth, I just wanted to give you a 3-slide introduction to Finario so you know who it is that's bringing you this presentation today. Finario is the world's most trusted capital planning solution application. We're the only purpose-built application that covers the full gamut of capital planning, capital allocation, capital management life cycle, from project ideation through planning and budgeting, requests and approvals, project forecasting, and reporting, post-completion reviews. It's all here. And we are integrated with your more popular ERP systems like Oracle, SAP, Infor, JD Edwards. We have native integrations with Coupa for procurement, Procore for project for construction management. We have native AI so that you can connect to your OpEx system, your EPM, such as Hyperion and OneStream. We can connect to your treasury software like Kyriba and on and on. So we are well set to be integral to all of your financial functions and needs. We are in 68, we have users in 68 countries and growing. We're in 28 plus industries. So we're in your industry, I guess it's safe to say. We have, at any given time, billions of dollars being managed within our system for capital projects. Perhaps most importantly to folks like you, we have best-in-class security with SOC 2 Type 2 certification and 99.99% uptime because we're hosted by AWS. Lastly, we're very proud of the company we keep. If you're in an industry that has meaningful capital expenditures, we're there, right? So whether that's agribusiness, food and beverage, manufacturing, metals and mining, pharmaceutical, wholesale distribution, if it's a category that has meaningful capital expenditure, meaningful CapEx, we're there and you can trust us to help you maximize your return on invested capital. So I promised that would be short, live up to my word. I'd like to now bring onto the stage my friend Seth Dobrin. Seth, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rich. I'm super excited to be with you and have this conversation with you today.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. So let's just kick it off. You know, you've had quite a journey, right? Going from molecular biology and genetics to becoming the chief AI officer at probably one of the world's largest companies and one that's known for its technology and its software. And now your next gig is going to be really waving a flag and spearheading the movement for responsible and trustworthy AI. How did you get here? What are some of the inflection points that led you on this journey to where you are today and what you're doing now?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question. I often get asked that question, and those words are, what the heck is a geneticist doing in this field is another way it gets framed up.
Yeah.
But believe it or not, what we think about when you hear the term big data and you hear the term AI and machine learning, those fields really started in two areas. It started in genetics and it started in astrophysics. And so back, 20 some odd years ago when I was doing my PhD in human genetics was the time of the Human Genome Project. And we were trying to figure out how do we leverage all this data we're getting from sequencing the human genome? How do we get insights from it? And what we considered large amounts of data back then, tens, hundreds of gigabytes, are relatively small today, but were near impossible to handle in tools like Excel. And so we had to start using some of the tools that you often hear talked about when you hear about machine learning or big data or AI, like Python and R, and statistical methodologies that we've been using for decades. We started using more in a learning manner where you could continuously learn from them. And so, I did my dissertation on that, started getting into agribusiness. So a field that Finario is deep in with your customers. So I worked in agribusiness in Monsanto, transforming their product development pipeline, leveraging not only molecular tools, but also data and machine learning or AI. And then about 6 years ago, I joined IBM and started leading their software efforts around machine learning and AI, and eventually morphed that role into their first ever global chief AI officer. Throughout that time, I've really been focused, because I'm not a technologist by training. I've always focused my perspective on this from a business perspective. So, what is the business outcome that we're trying to drive? How do you get the most value from it? And not just when I'm talking to finance people, but always, when you're in business, you care about two things: how much money am I making the company, and how much money am I saving the company? And every AI effort needs to be framed in that perspective. Plus, to really realize that value, it needs to be framed in the human perspective. So, what is the human impact? Who's going to be the ultimate user of the AI, and who's going to be impacted by the AI, which may or may not be the same people? Which led to your comment about, for the last 5 or 6 years or more, I've been championing the responsible use of AI and the ethical use of AI. And so, actually, next week I'll be announcing kind of what my efforts are going to be focused on in that regards, moving forward. 100% of my time really looking at how do we make sure that AI is implemented in a fair, responsible, and compliant manner that has consumer rights and accountability at the forefront.
Wow. Well, let's rewind a bit because I want to make sure that we address, what our audience is really here, and then we'll kind of pivot back to that. So if I had to venture a guess, I would say 100% of the people who are joining us today, and the many who will watch this video in the weeks to come, 100% will know what AI is conceptually, right? But I would also venture a guess that a large number of them, if not most, would struggle to articulate, like how does it get implemented? Where does it get implemented either from an enterprise sense or even down to the finance technology stack? Who has jurisdiction over it? And even like how the heck does this thing work? Like, I know what it does, but I'm not exactly sure, who corrals all this data? How does it get in there? So can you shed a little light on us, just kind of like the under the covers view of all of this?
Yeah. So, I mean, at its core, when we talk about things like machine learning or data science or AI, what we're really talking about is using math and computer science to help us make more informed and better decisions. And so, the math is the machine learning or the AI part. The computer science is how we implement that. So we integrate it into processes, workflows, and software that people are using, like Finario. There's AI that's going to be talked about later today in that. And so we have to surface it as something. And oftentimes we talk about AI as if they're independent of what's the operation that's happening. You need to think of it more as a system. So the AI system, how am I going to be using this to have a human impact? Because ultimately the goal should be to make someone's life better, cheaper, or faster, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
ultimately the goal of when we use technology is to do that. And we want to make sure it's done in a fair and responsible manner. And, we often, I'm going to go off, maybe off topic a little bit, but not really. When we think about machine learning and AI, we hear these dystopian stories about, AI is bad, AI is doing all these things. When in reality, again, AI is just math and computer science. Arguably or inarguably, I would say inarguably, math and computer science are not inherently biased and not inherently bad. where they become biased and can go off the rails is AI is really, really good at learning. That's what it does. It learns from the data you put in there. And the data that we're putting in there is based on past human decisions. So when we talk about biased AI, what we're talking about is talking about propagating the inappropriate decisions that we made as humans in the past, or things that we think today are inappropriate that maybe we didn't think were inappropriate before. And so it's really being able to understand and monitor and make sure that AI is implemented and minimizes the impact of those past decisions of humans on the decisions that we're doing making forward and moving forward. When you think about it in that perspective, AI actually has the potential of making the world a better place because it forces us, if we do it right, to make less biased, fairer, more inclusive decisions than we would have as individual humans, because we all have biases, whether we want to admit it or not. We're all biased in some way,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and so I think that's some important concepts to have in mind when we're talking about this. And then you asked about how do we consume AI? Well, really, in business and in our lives, we consume AI in three ways. We either buy it, we build it, or we're using it and we don't realize it.
Mhm.
And so I think that's where is it implemented in your organization? Probably everywhere, in some form. But I think it's also important that you think about as leaders, think about making sure that you have a good inventory of where AI is being used, because it will impact your reputation if it's not used in a responsible manner.
So is it a misnomer to believe that there's like a magic nucleus where all this math happens, or is it more like it's individually dispersed throughout all of the applications and kind of the various functions that are serving, like in our case, a corporate finance department?
Yeah, so I think there are opportunities for buying commodity AI use cases. So there are AI use cases that are just so widely distributed across your industry or multiple industries that the same problems being solved by multiple people. So why would you focus your intellectual capital on solving a problem that you can buy off the shelf, right? And
Hmm.
so, for instance, capital planning, that's pretty ubiquitous. Every industry needs to do capital planning, or HR, or things like that. I personally, I don't wouldn't spend any of my valuable human capital on solving problems that someone else has solved. I would focus my valuable human capital on solving problems that are unique to me, or that I think I have a unique piece of intellectual property that those humans can use to build
Hmm.
something net value added for me. So the answer to your question is yes. There should be, and there often are, in companies that are leading edge in this area. They buy stuff off the shelf because they want to focus their investments and their people on things that are going to be value added. They build AI, and they have teams that are focused and are domain experts and really highly skilled in these areas, building things for oil and gas, for retail, for banking, you name it, where they think they have a distinct advantage in the data that they have that can lead them to build a better information product that they're going to bring to the market to help their customers or their employees make better, faster, or cheaper decisions.
Well, that certainly speaks well to our philosophy being a cloud-based software solution, where we can bring to a customer, literally in a couple of months, a best-in-class solution for capital planning without having to, go through months or years of the expense and time of building something new. Why would you do that? But we digress. I wanted to ask you, you know, from a strategic point of view, I hear different things around whether AI should be a corporate strategy that comes down from the CEO. Is it a functional strategy? Is it more enterprise? Is it more function? Is it more like division? I mean, who should be driving this? Or I mean, and to kind of narrow that even further, should it be the job of the CFO to kind of push, demand, do everything he or she can to make sure that this best in class technology starts to make its way into their daily function.
Yeah. So for a couple of years when I first joined IBM, I was given a talk that I called and did a lot of blogging on, data. It was entitled "Data Science is a Scam." My comms folks hated it, as you could imagine, because
Mm-hmm.
someone, vice president of IBM, was saying something that they were trying to purport, push was a scam, but it was. Being the way it was being implemented was not going to generate value because it was not part of corporate strategies. It often wasn't aligned to corporate objectives.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you often hear of companies that spend, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or even billions of dollars on these data science or AI programs and aren't realizing the value. It's typically because there is no corporate strategy, and or the corporate strategy for AI is not aligned to the overall business strategy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so over the course of the last 10 years, since I've been doing this in Fortune 500 companies, I've built a methodology and a framework that I talk about as being a human-centered approach to AI. That is, starts with, what is your business strategy? Where is AI going to add value to that business strategy? So how is it going to help you reach that strategy faster and more effectively and more
Mm-hmm.
reliably? And then tying that to the actual execution model and looking at, again, who are the humans that are going to be impacted. It uses design thinking methodologies and look at that. What are the decisions? Because ultimately, when we talk about AI, we're talking about how are we going to make better, faster, or cheaper decisions. Every decision has a value.
Mm-hmm.
And so every decision that you make can actually be framed in the context of an NPV, if you will, or whatever metric you use to measure any capital project, because AI is
Yep.
essentially a capital project. You need to have a value. How much money am I going to make? How much money am I going to save? Most CFOs don't care about how much cost avoidance, because that's kind of funny money.
Yep.
And so I always encourage people to talk about their AI strategies in the context of their corporate strategy, with the metric being, how much money am I going to save, or how much net new revenue am I going to add? And then that is your measurement system moving forward for an AI program. We have saved this much money, we have made this much money, so we've added to the top or the
Yep.
bottom line. And my personal experience, so like when I was at Monsanto before I joined IBM, and even at IBM, we measured it in those values. And I
Yep.
can tell you almost to the penny before I left Monsanto how much money that we added to the top and the bottom line through our program. Uh,
Right.
that is a successful AI program because it has real business value. It was tied to corporate objectives. It moved
Yep.
our corporate objectives forwards. And in fact, towards the end, it actually changed the corporate objectives. We started measuring different things as a company because we were able to leverage AI in such a way that we actually changed our
Mm-hmm.
business model.
I suppose you can make that same argument for any component of the so-called digital transformation movement, to move from manual process and kind of outdated spreadsheets or whatever it is that's adding labor cost, time, slowing down decision making, all those things. And AI is kind of like putting that on steroids a little bit.
It's exactly like that. In fact, I was at an oil and gas executive, having a conversation with an oil and gas executive about 4 or 5 years ago, and I was talking to her, and we were talking about their AI strategy and how it wasn't connected. I'm like, so how many oil wells have you dropped without a strategy? How many
Mm-hmm.
refineries have you built without a strategy? Because they were investing similar amounts of money into their AI program that they would invest into building a new refinery or dropping a new well, but they were doing all these, and this is not uncommon. They don't have a
Mm-hmm.
strategy. Would you do any other capital project without a strategy? I mean, this really rings true with this audience, I'm sure. The answer is no. And so you
Yeah.
need to make sure you have a strategy. You need to make sure you have business objectives you're measuring. And
Mm-hmm.
it holds true. Digital transformation is AI is a vital component of digital transformation, as you mentioned.
Got it. I noticed in some of your prior talks and speeches, you've mentioned that, and I was actually amazed by this, that an average company has 8.6 clouds, 364 SaaS apps. It has 1,000 plus data sources. And I go, whoa, that's a lot of complexity. When you think about, I mean, just from a holistic standpoint, when you're thinking about data integrity, what data do you include in something like this versus not, where you wait, you know, how big is it a deal for a company to implement a system when they have this kind of Frankenstein of data coming from all parts of the company, some of which is connected, much of which is disconnected, and so forth? How do you, or at least how do you evangelize, if nothing else, to kind of try to reach that utopian point where everything is just kind of seamless?
Yeah, so I think for a while there was a push in the tech industry to get everyone to consolidate onto a single platform, which was looking at companies that were successful, like Monsanto, like Capital One, like
Mm-hmm.
the lead these the couple of Fortune 500 companies that really led in the digital transformation space. None of them had a single cloud.
Mm-hmm.
None of them had a single source of data. In fact, you could argue that those companies that embrace the chaos and figure out how to manage the data and how to manage the integration of that chaos are going to be the ones that would win, because the value, again, the AI learns from data. The more access you have to data that is in its native form, that's
Mm-hmm.
transacting in a way that's optimal for the use case it's being used for, the better off you're going to be. So in fact, in my experience, the goal is not to centralize data. The goal is to make sure your data is architected in a way that is optimal for a given use case, which may mean and often means that you have replicas of the same data multiple times for multiple different use cases. Now, there are a couple of exceptions for that. I always advise companies for finance data, you want a single source of data. You always want a single source of data for that, because you have to report that to regulators, to your shareholders, to your owners, and you want to
Yep.
make sure that you don't get multiple answers. And if you do get a different answer for two different people, it's highly explainable why you did, because there are sometimes different ways to cut the data to get a different response. Um,
Yep.
and so you want a single source of finance data always. So you need to figure out how you centralize that and how you connect to it in the optimal manner. And so it's kind of a hybrid, centralized, Frankenstein environment, as you said. And it's really about how do you create a virtual environment that allows you to connect to all these different areas. At the same time, you need to have good understanding of your data, because you need to be able to make sure that it's going to be used in a trustworthy manner. Because again, as you're getting insights from the data, there's lots of decisions that we've made in the past that
Mm-hmm.
are instantiated in that data that will be surfaced leveraging these tools, whether you want them to or not, if you don't account for them. So a really good example of this is, a decade or so ago, there was a bank that was trying to eliminate the impacts of redlining on mortgages in the US. Particularly, this was focused in the Northeast. Redlining was a process where literally mortgage brokers and realtors used to circle areas with red Sharpies and said, these people in the circle don't get loans. They tended to be Black and brown communities.
Yep.
Uh, and so they were intentionally trying to eliminate the impact of that. But the AI still picked up on some demographic information that was hidden based on where they live, because especially in the New
Mm-hmm.
York area, as
Yeah.
people that look alike tend to live in the same zip codes. And so that was what the models picked up on, even though they intentionally left out information to try and eliminate redline. They didn't even think about that. So it's a very,
Yeah.
overused, but very well understood example of how, you can AI or machine learning is the whole goal of it is to discriminate. It's to discriminate class A from class B, and it will pick up on things you intend to or not if you're not actively monitoring for them and making sure they don't surface. And so you have to make sure you really understand your data and the implications of your data and the decisions
Mm-hmm.
that were made that are surfaced in that data.
Wow. I mean, that your observations around single source of truth, and that's very consistent with what we do in terms of creating a connected capital planning framework. So you have the confidence in your data. I know you talk a lot about responsibility and trustworthiness, and I get that totally. Um, if I'm I'm a CFO. If I'm a leader in corporate finance, why should I care about those things? Other than, I understand getting the numbers right, but why do what's it to me?
Yeah, so I mean, there's actually a lot of good information out there in the last couple of years that show that. So for years, there's been information from analysts and from consulting companies saying that companies that leverage AI outperform those that don't in double digits typically.
Yep.
In the last year or two, there's been information, reports from PwC, from
I've heard.
BCG,
Yeah.
MIT, that kind of that shows that of the leaders, of the organizations that are using AI, the ones that take responsible AI seriously generate better products and services.
Hmm.
They are used to enhance brand differentiation, and they accelerate innovation. In fact, there was a report that came out a couple of weeks ago from MIT Sloan and BCG that has some good data in there that I can share with you, and you can share with your audience.
I'm actually going to bring it up in my next little
Okay,
slide. Yep.
great. But it's a great report that shows that responsible use of AI helps you make more money. It protects your brand, it protects your assets, but it also leads to more innovation because you're putting guardrails down. And you're saying within an organization, we did this very early on in IBM where we said there are things that we're just not going to do. We are not going to use general purpose facial recognition. We are
Yep.
not going to participate in mass surveillance using facial recognition. We're going to use biometrics in a way that's only for informed consent, right?
Hmm.
And so that put good guardrails for our development and our research teams to say, okay, we know if we operate in here, what we can and can't do. We know that if we're getting into a little bit of a fuzzy area, we need to go talk to the ethics board to say, is this something that we can do that's okay for us to do or not? And if not, how do we modify it in such a way that it is within lives up to our ethos? It's it's
Hmm.
it's really hard to drive innovation in a cutting edge area like this if you don't know what the guardrails are. So
Sure.
having good standards, good controls, good governance actually leads to more innovation, and the data shows it.
It seems intuitive, right? Um,
Well,
that you
not really, because most
would.
people think of governance as a roadblock, right? If
Yep.
governance historically has been a way to say no. Governance, it needs to be reframed as a way to, this is how we operate, and this is how you get to yes. These boards
Yep.
can't just say no; they need to say, okay, here's where you're going wrong. Here's what you need to do to get it back on track, so it's within the guardrails.
Got it. That makes total sense. Now we're getting a little tight on time. I wanted to make sure I covered this because it comes up a lot, at least in the narratives I hear when I do research on this. Is that I'm a company. I'm in the mid market. Maybe I'm a large enterprise, but at the lower end of the scale, in the $1 to $5 billion range. And it comes up as like we want to do machine learning, particularly to kind of automate a lot of our tedious processes, but we don't have the depth or the breadth of data that we need, or at least that we think we need to make it work. So what is what do you say to those people that are saying, you know, sounds great, but we just can't do that because we don't have enough data.
You know, I think when we talk about, there's lots of things you can do with small data.
Mm-hmm.
So there are lots of advantages you can get from leveraging machine learning or AI with small amounts of data. And you can do that today. In fact, I would argue that you should probably start with small data because you understand it better. Your teams can actually be able to explain what the models are doing in a more
Mm-hmm.
straightforward manner. And you should build up to using these larger data sets. There are publicly available data sets, and there are new technology that you can use to augment your smaller data. And there's new technologies that are becoming mature as we speak right now. One's called transfer learning, and the other are referred to holistically as foundational models. So transfer learning is, I take a model from one domain. So I take an AI from one domain, say oil and or manufacturing. So I'm going to
Yep.
train a model on a manufacturing line, and I'm going to look for defects in parts.
Yep.
Now I'm a bank. What am I going to do with defects in parts? Well, Defects in parts and fraud are really the same math. They are looking at something, a concept we call anomaly detection. So you're looking for rare events. You could
Mm-hmm.
actually take learnings from a model built for detecting part defects and move it over to financial services and say, I'm going to use the same type of model. I'm going to augment it with my small data. I'm going to retrain it using the small amount of data I have. And I'm now
Mm-hmm.
going to use that to detect fraud or vice versa. So that's transfer learning. There's lots of good companies out there that are starting to get into the space. There's a company called Hugging Face. It's a small
Mm-hmm.
startup that actually manages these transformer models, as we call them. Most of them are open source. And then there's this whole other concept called foundational models. And you may have heard of DALI, OpenAI, GPT-3. These are models that companies like OpenAI or Facebook or Google are training on the whole of the
Mm-hmm.
internet. So basically, they ingest massive amounts of data, and they're training these models that have trillions of what are called parameters or features, which these are just things that the model learn. They're little individual little elements that the models learn.
Mm-hmm.
And then you take these foundation models that are built and then you retrain them based on your specific use case. Now, the way they're implemented today, there are privacy issues. There are issues with hate and things like that in these models because they're trained on the whole of the internet. But companies like IBM and Microsoft and others are working on building these models in a more responsible, focused manner that minimize or understand the implications of bad data, of biased data and hate speech and things like that as they go into these models. So keep an eye out for foundational models, because now you can buy these and you can have a good start leveraging massive amounts of data that's available from others, and then train your data based on your small data. So I'd say in
Okay.
the next 2 years that will be a non-issue, what you just described, but it is a real
Interesting.
issue today.
Okay, so last question. I'm guessing that in our in our sphere here that machine learning is more the kind of attractive technology than the higher in the pyramid AI. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but I think you know what I mean. And then there's this notion of supervised versus unsupervised methods of creating those algorithms. If I'm a finance team, should I be kind of pushing for the supervised approach just so that I have confidence in how those are turning out, or is that a non-issue?
Yeah, I think chasing, I think as if you're a finance person, you should care about what you care about, which is what is the business case and what does that business case mean in dollars or cents. And if
Mm-hmm.
you go back to what we started the conversation, one of your first questions was, should your AI strategy be tied to your business strategy and should it be driven by the corporate teams? Yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
answer is yes. And so that should be what drives what types of models are used. So what is the business
Yep.
strategy? How is AI going to help that? Then you go, what are the models that are going to need to be built to get to that? And
Mm-hmm.
then what types of data do I need and how do I monitor those? Nowhere in that list is I'm going to focus on X, Y, or Z, supervised, unsupervised. I'm going
Yep.
to use the best model to solve the problem that's going to drive the most immediate source of value for me now. It could
Got it.
be it's going to be the biggest value, or it could be it's going to be not be a very big value, but it's going to have a big impact on how we operate as a company, or it's going to make our customers' lives better. So I think the conversation of what type of model should be used should be left to the experts, who are the
Mm-hmm.
people that are building the models. And as a finance person or as a senior leader, you want to make sure that you can understand how that model came to a decision. You want it to be explainable. You want it to be transparent. You want it to be all those things. But that's the you shouldn't worry about whether it's a supervised,
Okay.
unsupervised, self-supervised. I mean, there's all sorts of different types of machine learning models out there now, and that's
Not an issue.
not an issue.
Got it. Well, we're up against the clock. We can talk about this all day, and maybe if we were a TV show, we'd have a backstage, but where we can continue the conversation, but we don't. So I wanted to thank you very much. I'm going to pivot now to just a little bit of an overview of what's the status of things in the industry, in terms of the adoption of AI and machine learning in corporate finance. If you can hang by, just in case we have some questions, I think we're going to run a little shy on time, but I will certainly follow up with you if there's anything that comes up that people
Yeah.
want to ask. And again,
Happy to address any questions that come up afterwards, or reach out to me on LinkedIn and ask me questions directly.
awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so in the next 8 minutes, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of where corporate finance stands in this kind of transformative process or evolution. Um, and a lot of what you're going to hear in the next couple of minutes, you've heard already, ironically, or appropriately, I should say. So in 2021, Dresner Advisory did a study, I think it was toward the end of 2021, that indicated, and I actually thought this number was lower than I expected, but 60% of organizations are using or actively exploring machine learning. Yet, that's all across all categories or all functions. Only 20% of finance organizations are currently using AI or machine learning, and finance lags in most functions. So you say, hey, well, why is that? Well, the reasons that come up in a bunch of different sources all kind of gravitate around these four bullets. One is a lack of dedicated analysts and data scientists. And this is not necessarily an enterprise comment, it's specifically a finance function comment that the CFO's office needs more analysts and data scientists in order to do this work, probably in the FP&A department or function. There's this perceived cost of creating repeatable and systemized processes. And let's face it, if you're still living in a world of spreadsheets and manual process or kind of generic systems like SharePoint and what have you, it can look like a giant hill to climb to try to start to bring all this into a automated system like ours. Yet, it's really not the cost that's an issue, because as Seth mentioned, the cost will take care of itself almost immediately. It's really just the return on effort perception. And that is something that, if you partner with, with a good solution provider, that should also be less of an issue. P&L leaders don't have visibility into model inputs and thus lack trust. So, if I own the P&L at a brand, a product, a division, or whatnot, if I don't feel like I understand how the models were created, I am less likely to have confidence in those models. And that's something Seth talked about just a minute ago. And then lastly, the fragmented and disconnected systems and processes that kind of create this kind of barrier to wanting to move forward. So what's the solution to that? Well, we also talked about this a second ago. According to BCG study, the top performing organizations learn how to break the compromise between efficiency and effectiveness. So they don't think of it as a zero-sum game. They think of it as a strategic initiative, and put the investments where they belong to try to become more efficient, particularly throughout the finance function. And that's the second bullet, have highly efficient finance functions. They focus on business impact. That seems very intuitive. And then lastly, have a clear IT target picture. And so, your IT organization needs to be a partner in this whole kind of effort. And I think that's kind of also intuitive. If you look at a recent Gartner study, it also speaks to a lot of what we just talked about. The percentage of CFOs who say they're going to have more involvement over these kinds of initiatives. 72% said improved flexibility of budgeting and forecasting, which, not to plug our own brand again, is exactly what we do, is provide more flexibility around budgeting and forecasting, because you have the data and the user interface in order to be able to engage that data and grab from it the outcome, the insights that you need to be more agile, more effective. And then second on the list, was reallocate capital based on challenging demands. Well, if the last 2 years haven't proven anything, it's that there's a lot of challenging demands facing the finance function these days. And having the wherewithal to be able to pivot quickly is really key to survival and to thriving in this new world order, if you will. Just to kind of punctuate that point, and Seth referenced the BCG study on what characterizes a high performing company or enterprise. The what was queried was, well, what are the types of activities that are most important to the CFOs, and what define a top performing organization. Number one on the list here was accurate and credible forecasting. And number two, which I believe is quite correlated, is the ability to do ad hoc analysis, advanced analytics, and ultimately also AI. So, if you kind of peel it down even a little bit further, why is machine learning of such interest to those in the finance department? It's because it's ideally suited for forecasting. Machine learning is focused on predictive performance, and the word forecasting is all about predictive performance. It can identify complex structures, supports a high degree of automation. This third bullet's really interesting. It's like there are a lot of off-the-shelf algorithms that can perform surprisingly well on a variety of tasks, and that's certainly something we just talked about 10 minutes ago. It can improve forecast precision, lead to a reduction in cost, and empowers agile decision making. So, in summary, that's kind of like a fast look, a breezy look at kind of where things stand. It all comes down to this. There's a lot of uncertainty between pandemics, inflation, recession fears, supply chain challenges, a war in Europe. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. And the result of all that uncertainty is literally putting the foot on the gas pedal for technology adoption. Because let's face it, you can't move fast enough if you're still living in a world of manual and disconnected data. CFOs are telling FP&A leaders they need more flexibility around budgeting and forecasting. And that's something we hear literally every single day of the week with our customers and our prospects. They need to be able to allocate and reallocate capital with greater precision faster. Making FP&A more predictive and agile is key to transformation. And lastly, organization must operationalize their AI strategy. So, it's one thing to talk about it, and I think Seth alluded to